Ferrari built a car that betrays its own drivers. Hamilton called it undrivable. Leclerc? He screamed for help. And now the FIA just confirmed the disaster down to the last millimeter. If you love raw F1 truth and want more real stories like this, subscribe now, because what you're about to hear, they never wanted you to know. Ferrari did not just fail in Qatar, they crossed a line that no top-tier team should ever cross. They put two elite drivers in a car that was not just slow, but fundamentally unstable. It wasn't a bad setup. It wasn't tire wear. It was a design that broke down under pressure, exposing both men behind the wheel to the limits of mechanical failure and emotional exhaustion. Lewis Hamilton, in his first season with Ferrari, entered Lusail hoping for redemption after a difficult start to the year. Instead, he found himself fighting a machine that turned against him in every corner. In radio messages that now feel prophetic, he described the SF-25 as undrivable and unstable everywhere. What at first sounded like frustration was, in truth, a clinical diagnosis of a car that had no business competing at this level. Then came Charles Leclerc, who reached his breaking point live on team radio. Screaming zero grip, fucking zero grip, during the second stint, he wasn't venting. He was sounding the alarm. The SF-25 was not giving him feedback, not giving him trust. It was slipping away from him in real time. And the worst part, the team had no answers, no upgrades, no interventions, just silence on the pit wall. And now, days after the checkered flag fell in Qatar, the FIA has confirmed the truth with raw, damning data. A post-race analysis revealed rear instability levels outside the expected tolerances, over 12% variance in vertical load across braking zones. That's not an adjustment issue. That's not a driving style mismatch. That's a structural flaw in the car's core concept. Ferrari didn't just lose a race. They compromised the integrity of their season. What this reveals is not just a moment of crisis. It's a window into a deeper fracture inside Maranello. A team that once prided itself on precision now finds itself chasing ghosts in a simulator and hoping drivers can compensate for engineering gaps. But drivers like Hamilton and Leclerc don't just need speed, they need trust. And this car has destroyed it. The honeymoon is over. The myth of the Red Revival is burning out under the Qatari floodlights. And now you're probably asking, how could this happen to Ferrari? How did the most iconic team in Formula One end up building a car that punishes its own champions? That's exactly what we're going to uncover in this episode. We're not here for PR statements. We're here for the truth, straight from the data, the radios, and the drivers themselves. So before we dive into what the FIA just confirmed and what Ferrari will never admit, make sure you subscribe. If you want real F1 stories not filtered, not scripted by teams, but told by those who live the sport, this is where it starts. Because what you're about to hear, they absolutely didn't want you to know. The moment the FIA published its post-race data report from Qatar, everything shifted. What had looked like just another painful weekend for Ferrari quickly became a smoking gun, a technical expose of what Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc had been screaming about all along. The SF-25 didn't just underperform, it collapsed. The car's structural integrity under high-load conditions failed in ways that went beyond setup choices or tire strategy. This was foundational. Ferrari arrived in Lusail knowing they were vulnerable. They had already fallen behind Red Bull and McLaren in the development race, but insiders still hoped that the unique layout of the Qatari circuit might mitigate their weaknesses. Instead, the exact opposite happened. Lusail's fast corners, high-speed transitions, and long lateral loads tore apart what little balance the SF-25 had left. From a very first free practice, Hamilton was on the radio describing a car that feels like it's on the edge of collapse. And collapse it did. Hamilton was forced to brake park firm to change his setup before qualifying, a desperate move that forced him to start 17th. Leclerc wasn't faring much better, unable to find grip even on low fuel. Both drivers reported rear instability so violent that the car would snap without warning. As engineers scrambled to trace the problem, the conclusion hit harder than anyone expected. The suspension and floor were not communicating properly. A millimetric disconnection that might seem minor on paper created aerodynamic chaos in the real world. The SF-25 became a machine that punished its drivers rather than empowering them. In Hamilton's hands, it was a tool of survival, not attack. Leclerc, raw and furious, summed it up during his race stint in a radio that will likely define Ferrari's 2025 season. Zero grip. Fucking zero grip. That wasn't frustration. That was surrender. No amount of talent could overcome a car that refused to follow physics through the apex. The most tragic part is that Ferrari knew. Not the full extent, perhaps, but enough. Enough to understand that the floor and suspension weren't syncing. Enough to know that this chassis had fundamental limitations. And still, the updates stopped. Development froze back in April. The factory focus shifted entirely to 2026. It wasn't communicated publicly, but internally, the team had already written off this season. Qatar simply exposed that fact in full daylight. Hamilton's 12th place finish was not the real story. The real story was what he said afterward. There's simply no speed. No speed, no direction, no explanation from the pit wall. This wasn't just an off day. This was a world champion left alone in a car he no longer believed in. Leclerc salvaged a single point thanks to retirements ahead of him, but his post-race debrief was even colder. We've tried everything. It's just slow. And that word slow carries more weight when it comes from someone who's run out of reasons to defend the team. Qatar 2025 will go down not just as a race Ferrari failed to win, but as the weekend where their drivers stopped believing. The moment the radios turned from feedback to alarm bells. The moment the FIA's cold data confirmed what Hamilton had been warning about for months. And now, with that evidence public, the story isn't about underperformance. It's about accountability. Because when a team knowingly runs two elite drivers in a broken car and hopes no one notices, the problem isn't just the car. The problem is the culture. The performance metrics from Qatar do not lie, and what they revealed about Ferrari's SF25 was more damning than anyone expected. Over the full race distance, both Hamilton and Leclerc consistently lost between 0.8 and 1.2 seconds per lap to Red Bull and McLaren. That margin wasn't occasional. It was systematic. Lap after lap, sector after sector, Ferrari was exposed as fundamentally outclassed in both straight-line performance and cornering stability. But the real humiliation came not from the top teams, it came from the midfield. Alpine and Williams, operating with fewer resources and older design packages, managed to outpace Ferrari on race pace. That level of degradation in competitiveness is not just unusual. It's unacceptable for a team with Ferrari's pedigree. For the Tifosi, it was more than just painful. It was historical embarrassment. The data traces the root cause to a structural disconnect not metaphorical, but literal. Engineers discovered a millimetric misalignment between the floor and rear suspension of the SF25. In wind tunnel conditions, this might be manageable. But in the heat and pressure of Lusail's sweeping corners, that flaw turned deadly. The rear of the car became aerodynamically unstable, particularly in sectors 2 and 3, where Hamilton reported unpredictable snap-over-steer, followed by violent traction loss. That aerodynamic chaos translated directly into tire degradation. Ferrari's attempts to manage the problem through strategy starting Hamilton on hard compounds, playing a long first stint fell apart quickly. The tires overheated due to erratic load distribution. The SF25 was shredding rubber not from aggressive driving, but from internal confusion in its own chassis dynamics. Hamilton said it best, it was a fight you wouldn't believe, just to stay on track. Leclerc's feedback mirrored this experience. His race engineer asked for balance updates mid-race, but the Monégasque replied with silence, followed by raw honesty. No balance. It's just slow. That kind of feedback, especially when it comes from a driver trained to give precise input on car behavior, is damning. It means the car wasn't evolving. It wasn't reacting. It was static, a passenger chassis in a sport that demands adaptability on every lap. And perhaps the most unsettling insight is this. Ferrari's simulator data had no idea this was coming. The virtual car showed a stable platform. The real car was a disaster. That simulation disconnect reveals a deeper systemic flaw in Ferrari's current technical structure. If your data tools tell you the car is ready and the driver says it's undrivable, who do you believe? In this case, the FIA's post-race telemetry sided with the driver. Hamilton felt the instability before the engineers admitted it. That's not intuition. That's elite feedback in its purest form. The accumulation of these raw truths leaves no doubt. Qatar didn't just go wrong, it went exactly as the physics predicted, had anyone chosen to listen to the drivers. Hamilton's 12th place wasn't just a low point in a legendary career. It was a statistical confirmation of Ferrari's competitive exit from the 2025 season. Not a defeat, a surrender, and one that was visible from the very first lap. One of the most devastating revelations from the FIA's post-race analysis was how violently the Ferrari SF25 responded under braking, especially into turn 10, where both Hamilton and Leclerc described sudden, uncontrollable bouncing. But this wasn't traditional porpoising, the kind seen in 2022 with ground effect reintroductions. This was something more insidious, a chassis and suspension system unable to maintain a stable aerodynamic seal under load. The car wasn't oscillating in rhythm. It was reacting in spikes, random and unpredictable. The issue stemmed from a millimetric disconnection between the floor and the rear suspension, a deviation so small that it evaded detection during static checks but turned catastrophic under dynamic pressure. In racing terms, that meant the airflow beneath the car stalled and recovered without warning, breaking the aerodynamic consistency drivers rely on at high speed. Through Lusail's fast corners, the SF25 felt like it was switching personalities mid-lap. At entry, understeer. At apex, balance. At exit, violent snap-over-steer. For Hamilton, this was not racing. This was crisis management. When a car behaves this way, it doesn't just lose lap time, it destroys the driver's confidence. Hamilton, known for his rhythmic corner sculpting style, found himself reacting corner by corner rather than planning his stints with precision. Every braking zone became a roll of the dice. He described the sensation as the rear being everywhere. That kind of language is an exaggeration. It's a top-level driver signaling that the mechanical foundation beneath him has failed. Ferrari tried to compensate through setup changes, but it was already too late. Hamilton's decision to brake park firm before qualifying a move that cost him grid position was rooted in desperation, not strategy. What the simulator showed as a balanced configuration was utterly false. The track exposed it within 2 laps. The changes didn't fix the instability, they exaggerated it. That is a red flag of the highest level in engineering. When your tools can no longer predict reality, you are driving blind. The tire degradation patterns added further proof of structural failure. On both cars, rear tires overheated rapidly even with conservative driving. That pointed to inconsistent vertical load and lateral stress being applied across the rear axle. Instead of distributing the grip evenly, the car overloaded individual corners of the tire unpredictably. Leclerc and Hamilton weren't overheating tires by overdriving. The chassis itself was distorting the tire envelope with every unstable transition. All of this revealed a deeper truth. Ferrari's design assumptions were flawed from the beginning. The simplification of the rear aero philosophy, intended to create a more driver-friendly car, removed key micro-corrections that helped rebalance airflow in real time. By trying to fix the SF24's instability with a cleaner concept in the SF25, they stripped away too much complexity. What they ended up with was a car that couldn't correct itself under load, and that meant the driver had to do all the work with no margin for error. By the halfway point of the race, the SF25 wasn't competing, it was surviving. And Hamilton's radio summed up the situation with chilling simplicity. "I don't know how we made it worse." That line wasn't a joke. It was a driver at the peak of frustration, unable to understand how a team of engineers with access to the world's best tools could produce a machine so fundamentally unfit for its purpose. At that moment, the technical failure of the car became a human one. It wasn't just about lap time anymore. It was about trust, and Ferrari had lost it.